I'm trying to get harder and tougher mentally and physically every day of my life.
You're either the growth mindset or you're the fixed mindset.
If you're trying to be the best, you need to look at who the best is and see what they do.
Relentless pursuit of progress.
There's a difference between the best and the rest.
Welcome to the Brute Strength Podcast.
Champions are built in the mind first.
Where we interview scientists, world champions, doctors, and experts in just about every area of health and fitness.
What do you care enough about? What are you fascinated enough about to go so deep and learn so much that you'll know more about it than anyone else?
And now, here's your host, Michael Cazayoux.
Hello, welcome back. This is Michael Cazayoux, and you're listening to the Brute Strength Podcast. Today, I'm interviewing Krista Scott Dixon. She is the Director of Curriculum for Precision Nutrition. She has a doctorate in Women's Studies from York University. She holds counseling certifications from George Brown, as well as leading edge training, and is certified by the Canadian Psychological Association. She's also a 3-time author, including the book Why Me Want Eat, Fixing Your Food Fucked Upitude. I love that. Originally, I had planned to talk to Krista all about nutrition science, art of coaching, and everything that her and PN have become so renowned for in the health and fitness industry. And we certainly touch on some of that stuff. But in my preparation for this podcast, I realized how wise and grounded Krista is. And I think now more than ever, in this time where we're going through COVID-19, the corona, all of that stuff, I think we need more people like her speaking up that can bring a calming energy. And so we start out talking about what is most present for her in her life and what she's thinking about right now. We talk about how this is really a great time to focus on what matters and some of the insights and reflections that she's been having. We talk about how people are having a tendency to want to distract from this period and just focus on getting to the end of it rather than being present. And we talk about like what an opportunity it is to be really present and just feel how alive you are right now. We discuss how to use this as an opportunity to build your self-esteem, your ability to cope with tough experiences. And then we start talking about what's going on in the health and fitness industry, how clients' goals are changing, how coaches are stepping up to the plate and responding to this change in different roles, having different roles like having to support people with new emotional challenges, for instance. And then we talk a lot about how to be a better coach or guide. About one concept is rather than trying to just fill someone with knowledge and cram a bunch of information down their throats really quickly, how can you take the opposite approach? How can you ask the most essential question that leads to growth, and how you go about picking the right question, for instance? We talk about the idea of assuming that the client, the athlete, already has the answer inside of themselves, and it is the coach's kind of responsibility or opportunity to just help them come up with the answer that is already inside of them, and allowing them to be the hero rather than you, the coach, looking like the hero. And finally, we talk about one of the things that PN is really a champion of, which is how consistency in nutrition and really lots of areas of life, how consistency is king. What some of the culprits are in our minds and our thought patterns of achieving consistency, and how we can have more of it. This one it felt just so easy because Krista, I can just ask her, the simplest question and she just runs with it. And before we even started, I was just like foaming out of the mouth to learn from her. So this was really a pleasure for me, and I know you're going to get so much out of this. So without further ado, please help me welcome Krista Scott Dixon. Krista, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. I texted John Berardi last night, just like almost overwhelmed with emotion and admiration. I said, John, I admire your ability to attract such amazing people to Precision. Because I was preparing for this interview, I knew you must be kick-ass because of who recommended you. And then as I start diving into it, I'm like, what a kindred spirit and someone I just admire so much. So it's such a privilege when I get to interview someone where I'm just like dying to learn from you. So I'm just super excited to be here today.
Well, that's tremendous. I mean, gosh, that makes me feel really good. I'm hoping to learn from me too. Let's see what I say.
So we're recording this on April 1st, and we're right in the middle of the COVID-19 Corona stuff. And like I said before, my plan was to talk all about nutrition and coaching and all of those things, and we'll certainly touch on those. But I think that you have a really important message and some important thoughts to share with people in this super stressful time, whether they be interested in health and fitness or not at all. So where I want to start is what's most present for you right now in your life, given this really stressful time?
What's most present for me is this idea that there is no longer a script. Like we literally have no idea how this is going to end. I mean, we can make predictions and projections and make models, but this is an unprecedented event in human history. Now, of course, there have been plagues and all that kind of stuff, but we've never experienced something that spreads so rapidly, so dramatically. We've never experienced this kind of thing before in the way that it's operating. And it's interesting because last year before my father died, he was sick, and he said to me, kind of contemplating his end, he was like, this was not in the script. Meaning that he'd had some other idea of like how life should go, right? That there was a script, first of all, and that it should have particular events, and then it should be, fairly predictable. And I remember finding that such an odd thought that there would be a script for life. But I think a lot of us do have this implicit belief that life is on some level predictable and controllable. And if we just arrange things correctly, then particular outcomes will occur. And of course, we can increase the probability of certain things happening, right? Someone contacted me recently and said, well, if you're healthy, you won't get sick from COVID-19, right? Like we should just stay in shape and exercise and eat well and stuff. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's always better to be younger and healthier and fitter in all circumstances, right? That does increase your probability. But in every probability game, there's a non-zero chance of you also losing, right? So it doesn't make us invincible and immortal. So I think in the fitness industry, we are in a way in the business of selling the script that if you do this, then this other thing will happen. And for me, what's very present right now is we are so off the script. And I think that opens up, it creates massive feelings of panic and uncertainty and that kind of stuff. But it also opens up incredible opportunities to throw away old beliefs, old routines, old limiting things that we had in our heads. Even stuff like worrying about meaningless little fiddly crap, all that seems super irrelevant right now in the face of the larger picture. So I am really thinking about how we are, in a sense, bringing ourselves into being with every moment that this thing unfolds. Everything is completely fresh. And that's just a fascinating thing to witness.
Amen. So have there been any like beliefs or patterns in your life that you feel yourself kind of letting go of or stepping into, or I don't know, comprehending on a different level right now because of that?
I think for me, one of the very present feelings is my life could be definitively shortened here. Like I feel the threat in a very present way, and not that I'm paranoid about it. It's more like, what if my number comes up on the roulette wheel here? And so for me, that's something I'm really thinking about quite a lot. And so it's definitely changed my orientation to almost everything I do, whether that's again, small details of nutrition or like a fight with someone that I love, or like it just, I don't know, it just positions your head in such a different way. I'm not really sure if I'm completely answering your question, but that's what's very alive for me right now is like, what if I only had a week to live or 2 weeks to live. And on my Facebook, I had this last days on earth challenge that I ran of like, what if you thought you were going to end it all in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever? How would that change your choices? And I think that it would realign a lot of things for a lot of people.
Was there anything surprising for you in that inquiry?
I think the sense of finiteness is a new thing. Because, I mean, I'm 46, but, so when I was 25, that would have seemed really old, right? But my grandmother's 93, so I'm kind of hoping to at least hit that. So I think what's kind of a surprising thing is the sudden and very literal sense of my own mortality. So it's not just a vague, I'm entering the second half of my life, death awaits kind of stuff. It's like, I literally could die. And it feels like a very real threat. And I think this is a particularly salient thing because, with something like a virus, literally every molecule could be a threat. It could be dangerous, right? And it's unseen and unobservable. It's not like, oh, I wear my seatbelt or I don't smoke. There's a good chance I'm not going to get mauled by a bear. There are very preventable things that you can see coming as what your demise is going to be, right? Whereas this, it's like a very nebulous, vague kind of threat that you're not going to see coming in lots of ways. So it's a very, I don't know, it makes me think that this must be how people lived for a lot of human history, which is that you really could die tomorrow. Anything could take you out at any minute. I think, we have fantasies now about immortality in the 21st century that we never really could have had before for most of human history. I mean, we've always wondered about transcendence and stuff like that and what's after. And, we've sought the fountain of youth. But I think we have expectations around that in a way that we didn't before. And to go back to what my dad said, I mean, he passed away in his mid 70s. So for most of human history, that is a champion lifespan, right? What an amazing luxury. But in 2019, you can formulate the thought that 75 is not long enough. So yeah, I think that's, so I'm very much conscious of thinking about things and living in a way that my ancestors did. They dealt with this stuff all the time. Food shortages, inadequate safety, the threat of ever-present mortality. So I'm kind of taking comfort in that, though, in a way.
I can so relate to that. I don't know where I heard it, but someone just said to me, you come from generations and generations and generations of people that have dealt with things just like this. So not only is it in your, you've already in your lifetime gone through hard things and built self-esteem around those and the ability to cope, but you have it in your DNA to overcome the hardest things on the planet. It's so grounding.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's giving me a lot of comfort, and even things like the simple things like going to the grocery store and the only food left at one point was a bag of potatoes, basically. And I was like, a bag of potatoes. It kind of took me back to oh my God, this. I'm totally fronting for my people because part of my family's from the Ukraine, right? We probably lived on potatoes and turnips for a good 9 months of the year at certain times, right? So I had this feeling of being connected to a thread, but also kind of recognizing what a bizarre historical moment the last few decades were, where people were purposely not eating potatoes because they thought potatoes were bad. What an incredible luxury and privilege it is to be able to care about our nutrition and to try to refine it to the level that many of us try to do.
So something I've been trying to bring myself back to is I've noticed in myself and in so many other ways, this wanting to treat this period of time like a distraction from life. And if I can only get to the end of this, then, XYZ ... And what I'm trying to remind myself of is, no, this is life, and be super present, maybe even more present than ever before, because there's lessons here. There's beauty here. There's it's in a lot of ways, this is more real than any other time of my life. And I definitely find myself, I lose that really easily, right? I keep thinking oh man, I can't wait until the weekend. I'm working so much harder than ever. And I just keep bringing myself back. What do you think of all of that?
I actually got chills when you said that. I'm much more engaged with my life, or this is living. Because yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we are living in the sense of like it being an active verb now more than ever. I think we have been jolted out of our collective anesthesia about things to engage with some very real, literally life or death issues, and that has a way of really sharpening the senses, And I'm a big fan of historical drama movies. I love learning about history through movies, and to me, it's always super fascinating to see how other people lived and thought, and like this is exactly the kinds of things that human beings have been forced to confront. And I mean, I'm sure other people have said this before, but like we're never more alive than when we're closest to death. And not that I'm advocating for it, right? But it really does ask us to show up in a way that we've never been asked to show up, probably ever. Mm-hmm. And so it is a huge opportunity to say, all right, tough guy, tough girl, like, what are you made of when the chips are down and you're asked to do something, whatever that thing is? What are you going to do? How are you going to look back on this period if you make it through and remember what you did? Mm-hmm. And is this period going to end? I mean, I think that's another assumption, right? Like, oh, everything's going to be fine. We're going to fix this and it'll be all cool, right? And hopefully that is the case, right? But what if it's not? What if this is the new normal? So yeah, we are living in this moment, and there's no, once we get this inconvenient thing over with, like I think the world will be forever changed.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like this is an opportunity for like the inner warrior of all of us to like finally come out in a way that it hasn't. I don't think it's been possible to come out like this in our lifetime. Like we haven't gone through this type of challenge, at least in North America that I can think of, for the vast majority of us, and unless people are still alive from the Great Depression. And it's an opportunity to like really find and bring out the strength and the leader and the internal guru in each one of us, rather than hoping someone else is going to take care of us.
Yeah. And I think you're making a really powerful statement about we cannot afford the bystander effect anymore, mm-hmm. right? This cannot be just someone else's problem to deal with anymore. We are all called upon, each of us, to confront this. And there are lots of selves that we can call on, right? The inner warrior is a great one. The inner Zen monk to calm ourselves and not freak out. The inner caregiver, the inner connector, right? The inner person who has empathy for the rest of humanity, who feels, others' pain and wants to help and wants to do good. So there are all these wonderful parts of ourselves that can really be called into service. And perhaps as human beings, needed to be called into service for us to be optimally healthy. I mean, we talk at Precision Nutrition about deep health. And one of the big domains of deep health is existential health, which is like having a sense of a purpose or a greater why. And it doesn't even have to be like anything magnificent. It can be taking care of your neighbor. I did a good deed today, right? I felt like I had some worth and value by helping someone else. And human beings need that. And like you said, it kind of has to be tested in a very real way. Otherwise, we're just kind of floating along in the stream. Like we need to be sharpened sometimes, I think.
I love that. I listened to your podcast episode with Michael Gervais, phenomenal job. And one of the things that I heard you say on there was something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing here, when you deliberately put yourself in harm's way or life puts you in those situations, anxiety gets burned away in the crucible of life experiences. So basically you lose anxiety, or you get through anxiety by going through tough experiences and building your self-esteem. My question is, what if, as someone is going through a really tough experience, maybe they're going through this experience of coronavirus right now, and they just have such a negative headspace, and they're creating a lot of pain on top of real pain, right? A lot of story pain and suffering on top of their pain. Is it possible that their self-esteem gets harmed in the process?
That's a really, super interesting question. And it speaks to the larger question of post-traumatic growth, right? Because we know about post-traumatic stress. We know that that's a thing. Most people, I think, have a general working concept of post-traumatic stress, but we're less familiar with post-traumatic growth. and resilience. And the fact that those two things can actually happen simultaneously, like you can feel horrible while still growing, maybe even flourishing by a certain definition, right? So I think one thing we fail to appreciate about human beings is our complexity. We can feel 50 things at the same time and not really have them be entirely inconsistent, right? But we know that just like post-traumatic stress, there are differing individual responses to post-traumatic growth. So some people seem to just come out of things okay, maybe even better than they were before. Other people never really recover somehow. And so there've been lots of like questions around what makes that possible. And definitely one of the big pieces is that big why, like finding meaning in suffering is a really big part of it. And also is exactly as you say, not layering suffering on suffering on suffering on suffering. Like I would say, don't be the asshole in your own head. Don't be the abuser in your own head, because there's enough assholes in the world already, right? So I think one of the mental skills for people to develop is to notice when the suffering is real, like actual in the moment, objectively experienced, and when the suffering is imaginary is the wrong word, but when the suffering emerges from stories and scripts and thoughts and projections that really aren't the now. And it's not so easy as to just say, hey, knock it off, right? Like getting out of our own stories is a skill set that we can learn. But I think it's a crucial concept. And I don't know if this is like a North American Protestant mindset that if you're suffering, you're doing something useful. But like, I think a lot of us have somehow internalized the idea that feeling bad is useful, or feeling bad is like a way of taking responsibility. So if I'm really mean to myself, somehow I'm owning something or I'm taking responsibility, but that's not actually the case. But somehow I think that narrative is in a lot of people's heads. And so a lot of that extra suffering is really well intended, because I think it comes from the place of people wanting to do a good job and wanting to live with integrity and wanting to care and to do the right thing. It's just, it's a maladaptive tool.
Yeah, I love that. How are you approaching this period of time? Actually, rather, like if you had and maybe you have a specific example, but if a friend or family member or client of yours was just really spinning out about this whole thing, just full of fear and just having a really tough time, what might you say to that person to help them get through this with more grace and ease?
I think one of the big ones is just to recognize that you're not alone. So I think that one of the most distressing feelings for human beings is that we're alone and we're isolated. So it's not like a fun, me time. It's like isolated, right? Alienated. And that's very distressing for people. And so I think the first step is to help them understand this is a very normal response to a messed up situation. And everyone around the globe right now is feeling some version of what you're experiencing. And people seem to find that a very comforting thought, that yes, they're suffering, and I'm not going to fix that for them. But it's a normal response to an abnormal situation, and it's a very shared experience. So that's piece number one. Piece number two, obviously, to bring compassion to that, bring some gentleness and some kindness, and to just be, decent with yourself during this moment of pain. Step number three is to not try to fix it, because this is a very legitimate response. So rather than fixing, we notice. And I find with feelings, it's very helpful to externalize them. So if you're a talker, talk about it, record yourself. If you're a writer, write it, but somehow get it out of yourself and onto or into the world. And so there's something about the act of externalization that transforms things. So when the fears, when you're just walking around with the fears in your head, they're just amplified and magnified, and they're looping like one of those little looping videos on social media. Like it's just over and over and over, getting louder every single time. Whereas if I sat down and took like 10 minutes to focus on this and wrote down every single thing I was freaking out about on a piece of paper, or talked to someone for 5 minutes and like they couldn't say anything, all I could do was talk about how scared I was, something about that experience for me would then be transformed. So that's what I encourage clients to do. I don't fix fear. I don't change fear. All I do is get fear unstuck and moving. Because once it gets moving, then it starts transforming. And it was interesting. One of my clients just said to me, we were talking about progress and different indicators of progress. And she said, I don't know if this is an indicator or not, but I've started crying lately. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's terrific, because it means the glacier is thawing, right? So this was someone who was previously really struggling to even notice their emotions, never mind express them. But once you start crying, once you start expressing, once you're able to get the insides to the outsides, that's when the growth starts to happen and the change starts to occur. So it sucks when you're in it. It sucks so bad. But there's something powerful about being able to witness human suffering and be present with it without trying to change it.
That's beautiful. I feel like so the keeping the fear or being just full of fear and anger or whatever these extreme emotions are, and not expressing them and not dealing with them in a healthy way, that's really harmful. But what can be just as, if not more harmful, is denying yourself to feel those, right? Especially like sadness and grief, and just like trying to grind it away and pretend like they're not there. Like those things need to be honored and felt.
Yes, absolutely. And those are evidence of you being a vibrant human being, right? I think we tend to treat these emotions as like, oh, they're bad. We call them negative emotions, right? But this is what puts you in touch with your life force. To have these feelings so intensely, it tells you you're alive and you're caring. I mean, people who don't feel emotions, we call them sociopaths, right? Like there's something wrong with you, if you spend your whole life feeling nothing. So, or we call them depressed, or that is considered kind of a dysfunction if you are never able to experience an emotion. So I think it's really important to reframe these things for people and say, listen, this shows something amazing about you. Like anger, for example, is a great demonstration of your values. Like we feel angry when someone violates our values. When I see someone, this is just a stupid little pet peeve, but when I see someone going to a Starbucks or whatever, back in the day when we could go to Starbucks and talk to someone, right? On their cell phone, the good old days, we could interact with human beings in real life, on their cell phone, completely ignoring the cashier and treating this transaction like they're just talking to a wall. Now that makes me angry because it violates my value of treating other human beings with respect and dignity and acknowledging their basic presence, right? So, that's just one example of the good things that your emotions say about you. If you're sad right now, my God, good for you, because that means you're a feeling human being.
Yeah, I love that. And please don't hear this, guys, and start to use your anger to demonstrate your value out there. There's a lot of that going on right now too. And it's not always a negative thing. That's great.
Well, I mean, before we move on from that, there are actually different sorts of emotions, right? So the primary emotion is that core thing that you feel in your soul, right? That is intrinsic to you, and you would feel it no matter what, no matter who was around. We want to distinguish that from what I would call performative emotions or instrumental emotions or emotions that I have for the purpose of other people who are around me. So if I get very self-righteously angry and I vent it on social media, right? That's now a few steps removed from my core physical experience, somatic experience of being angry. So, and I mean, we call that in a way manipulation, right? Demonstrating emotions to get some kind of outcome from the people around us. So I think we always want to ask, is this emotion adaptive or maladaptive? Does it make sense in the situation or not? And is it within me, or is it for the benefit of other people? Or am I trying to get some kind of outcome as a result of it? Those are questions to ask yourself.
Nice. So you work with either directly or indirectly hundreds, thousands of clients that are trying to lose weight, lose body fat, feel more comfortable in their own skin. And then you also work with the same amount or more coaches, coaching people that want to lose weight, et cetera, et cetera. How are you seeing people's goals changing right now?
That's a really interesting question. And I think part of it is maybe shaped by the kinds of clients that I tend to take on. So I tend to attract clients who are much more interested in the inner game, or the developing a fuller experience of deep health. like a multidimensional deep health. Or if they're athletes interested in performance, they're interested in sustainable performance. So they tend to be people who are really interested in some kind of multidimensional, sustainable, inner game kind of initiative, right? So that could be weight loss. I don't mean to make it sound like some really, philosophically deep pursuit. It could be weight loss, but on some level, they acknowledge that to change your outsides, you have to change your insides. That's the kind of clients I attract. But I do believe that
a quick question about that.
Yeah, sure.
It makes it sound like people that sign up for PN get to choose their coach. Is that accurate?
No, that's randomly assigned.
Okay.
And so I have my own group of clients that I see on my own.
Okay.
And then we have our precision nutrition coaches that are, so it's you're assigned to a coach sort of a little bit more randomly.
Got it.
Although you can, if you have your favorite coach, you can always request them.
Cool,
sometimes
cool.
coaches have fans. So, I mean, over the years, I have seen a lot more acknowledgement about the fundamental unsustainability of a lot of get lean quick diet programs. I think more and more coaches are coming to realize that's just not on, and not even from a technical standpoint of the achievability of it, but it doesn't make sense for me to just crash diet my clients for 3 months and never see them again, right? That's not a sustainable business model. I have to keep finding clients every 3 months. That's not workable, right? So I think a lot of coaches are coming around more to that. The other thing I think we're seeing a lot of is more and more populations being represented. So now we have a sizable cohort of people who want to remain active and healthy and maybe even significantly athletically competitive at older ages. So that's, I think, relatively new. Coaching used to be restricted to high school athletics or college athletics or, professional athletics, but athletes tend to have a cutoff point, right? No one is a professional athlete really after age 35 or 40. So in the past, a coach's role was very restricted to those spheres in which you would work with athletes or you would work with bodybuilders. It was very, very physique oriented. I think now in 2020, the consumer base of people who seek out coaching has changed tremendously. So older clients are one example. Another one would be women who are looking to get muscular and strong. This is unprecedented. Women who expect a very high level of functionality after childbirth, also unprecedented. So we're just seeing new, and we're also seeing younger athletes too, right? Who are at a pipeline of development at an earlier age than we might have done. So I think just the client base is changing and broadening and diversifying. And we're changing our ideas about what fit looks like, performs like, is like, what gender, ethnicity, age, sport, whatever, body composition it could be. So that's the direction I see that we're going, hopefully. Feels like a good one.
Yeah, that's awesome for humanity, for sure.
Yeah, I think one of the most fascinating ones has been the adaptive athlete community. That has just been, it's exploded in the last 20 years, with military folks and advances in, for example, spinal cord research, which presume that you will be active after certain injuries. That has just been an amazing group to witness. The creativity and the expectations for performance now have increased greatly. So that's just one example. And they're redefining what it means to be an athlete.
Yeah, I love that. So that's super interesting. My question though was more geared towards how are people's goals changing in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks?
Oh yeah. Okay. So the time scale is shorter. Yeah, it's interesting. I would say that people's goals are very much shifting to what I would call big rocks in the jar. So, people listening are familiar with the metaphor of filling a jar with rocks and pebbles and sand, and obviously you put the big rocks or the core priorities in first. And I think
go
people are
YouTube that if you have no idea what she's talking about. It's one of the best metaphors for life ever.
Truly
rock,
it is, isn't it?
Rock in jar exercise or rock in jar concept, YouTube.
Yeah. And we actually just call it big rocks. Now we'll say big rocks is now a synonym for priorities at Precision Nutrition. So they're really thinking about what are my big rocks and what do I no longer need to worry about? And so I'm really noticing people's goals shifting to the joy of movement. oh my God, I got to get outside today. And I ran on a crappy high school track that was all like beaten up and had chunks of asphalt and weeds, and it was glorious. I got out in the one ray of sunshine today. It was amazing. So I think their goals are really, they're stripping out a lot of the minutia. So losing weight just seems less important right now. And the fact is that we're being prevented from a lot of that, right? Like my clients are like, I went to the grocery store and the shelves were bare. I couldn't buy protein. So I had to pivot and think, how do I eat healthy with a different kind of menu? So the goals are really around more like creatively adapting to the situation, still maintaining that frame of like wanting to do whatever is meaningful to them, but recognizing that the game conditions, I think, have significantly changed. So the goal, like, first of all, is for a lot of people to just survive, right? Figure stuff out, reorient around priorities, get rid of a lot of the crap I worried about. Suddenly 30 grams of protein in a meal just doesn't seem all that important anymore. That's what I'm seeing a lot of. People, I think, are the goals are much more like, if I could call them like empowering goals as well. Like, oh my God, it feels so good to move my body. Wow, I better do my rehab now. Right. So yeah, I think there's that.
What about the role of coaches? Y'all have dozens of coaches. How is their role changing, as well as all of the people that are in Pro Coach working under y'all?
Yeah, I think the coach is now becoming a really crucial hub of support, and the coach offers structure and tools to talk about this, to get through this. Like a coach is somebody who's trained to engage with people about human issues in a way. And so for a lot of people, don't go to therapy or counseling or anything like that. They talk to their coach. So the coach is now uniquely positioned to be at the center of a support network for a client. So the coach is now having conversations around, how do you eat? How do you modify meals? How do you exercise? How do you modify that in your own home? And how do you hold it together, right? How do you manage your headspace? And how do we form connections? So a lot of coaches are doing like group coaching calls with a lot of their clients, so people can come together and just be together in circles of support. But I think the coach has always been, interestingly, a frontline healthcare worker in a certain kind of way, because especially in the United States, without public healthcare coverage, many people simply just don't go to the doctor, but they go to their coach. They talk to their trainer. They talk to their coach about health issues. So, the coach was already in that direction anyway as a frontline healthcare worker, but now, arguably, in the last couple of weeks, the coach has become also a frontline mental health care provider as well.
We're hearing that as well. Our coaches at Working Against Gravity are saying they feel like they're being called upon to be more like therapists. And on one hand, I know that they feel so like it's such a gift to be able to serve. And on the other, they're coaching a lot of people, and it can be really, it takes a huge mental toll. How can coaches that are being called to take on a little bit of a different role right now, how do you think they can serve while also preserving themselves?
That's such an important question. And I think the first step is even just to say that sentence, right? Your role is to serve, but also preserve. Like you have to put that oxygen mask on yourself. I'm sure people have heard that metaphor, right? So to be in a life of service does not mean you destroy yourself as part of that life. It means, in a way, that I think of coaches, I think of them as like athletes of the human condition in a way, right? So what do you do as an athlete? Well, you have your training session, you have your recovery session, you have your modalities of various things, you have periodization, you have intense times, and you have rest times. So, coaching, you should think of coaching in a very similar way to understand you cannot be full frontal emotional labor all the time. You cannot be on duty 24/7. So treat intense engagements with clients as your workouts, and then look for that recovery and regeneration in between, and understand that you need it. Like that tank is going to get depleted. It's like that app on your phone that drains the battery really, really fast, right? So as much as you may love engaging with people and caring for them and helping them and, that it still runs the battery down, especially if you're not trained for it, right? Like none of us were trained as counselors and therapists. So, we don't have the equipment for it. So that's a really important piece. Another one is don't go into these woods alone. Like talk to other coaches, get that support from other coaches, whether it's just to vent. I mean, again, that externalization, right? Whether it's just to vent or just to say like, this is really messed up, or to say, guys, I've been eating chocolate chips by the handful. Like I'm just trying to cope. I'm not going to out anyone at Precision Nutrition, but let's just say all of us are embracing our junk food habits and day drinking. So
day drinking.
Yeah. So I'm not going to say who was eating ice cream out of the carton on a meeting yesterday, but it was one of us.
That's
and because coaches are human beings. And so, I mean, if you're listening to this and you're a coach, do not put that pressure on yourself to cope in a perfect way, right? You are going to feel that pull to cope just like everybody else is going to, you're going to want to watch, binge watch Netflix or whatever it is you do, that's your jam. So get that support from other coaches as well. And really understand that you need that replenishment to be able to give to others. And if you're a counselor or a therapist, you have supervision. Like there's a specific mechanism and a system that you have. And essentially, it's almost like you have your own counselor to talk about caseloads, right? But coaches don't have that model in our industry. A lot of us are working alone. So don't do that. Go and find other coaches, talk to them. Again, even if it's just a vent, understand that you're going to need that rest and replenishment. Because if that tank is empty, and it empties really fast, you just run out of, shits to give, and you're like, I'm done. And then you come home and you yell at the dog or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we call that compassion fatigue. And so that's worth a Google. That's worth a Google, is compassion fatigue. Mm-hmm.
So transitioning into more like general coaching stuff, which I think is still applicable right now because coaches are so important. One of my favorite beliefs that you hold is about coaching is, rather than the coach thinking he or she, their job is to just cram as much knowledge into this new person or this client or this athlete's head as possible, just give them the full download of everything they know. Taking an approach of almost the opposite approach. One thing I've heard you say is like, what is the one question that I can ask that will lead to stimulation or lead to growth? Can you unpack that a little bit? And then also, what I'm really curious about is like, how do you pick the question? How do you triage of all of the things that I know that I've been studying about for 10 plus years? How do I know kind of where to start someone?
Yeah, it's a good question. So remind me if I forget any pieces there. So the first question was, okay, go back to the first question for me because I focused on the second one. I kind of lost it a little bit.
Just dissect a little bit of the concept of, rather than cramming a bunch of knowledge, what's the one question that I could ask that would lead to growth?
Yeah, got it. Okay. So, I mean, just to back up and give a little bit of context there, I think, we live in a very cognitive culture, right? We value thinking so much, and reasoning. Maybe I shouldn't even say we value thinking, because I'm not even sure there's huge evidence of that, but we value the cognitive dimension of life and what I call like eyebrows up, from the eyebrows up living, right? And we give less value to the somatic or the body-based experience that we have in the world, or taking action. And so I think we have a model as a result where people feel like, okay, I need to think about a bunch of stuff before I can make any changes. And that's not wrong. I mean, learning is great, research, problem solving, writing stuff down on paper, whatever. But what I see is that in the domain of doing, especially if it's doing to either change our bodies or engage in some kind of performance, the cognitive thinky brain is the parking brake on all of those other pieces. And the analogy is something like, let's say that you're starting a new relationship and you really like the other person, but all you can think about is like, oh, do they like me? Do they like this shirt I'm wearing? How is my hair? Do I have spinach in my teeth? Like, you're then completely unable to connect with and experience that other person. So the thinky part of the brain inhibits your ability to have a direct experience. And so in this domain of coaching that we're doing, we want people to have a direct experience. We want them to be in their bodies and in their lives, and in their own perceptions, whether that's movement or mindful eating or whatever. So too much cognition inhibits that. So what we try to do is get them to think less and do more. It's like, an Olympic lift is a perfect example. The more you think during an Olympic lift, the less likely you are to get that magical moment of the bar floating up, right? So in terms of knowing the right question, I think part of that is a function of experience. But part of that is there are not infinite questions. As human beings, we return to the same core questions over and over and over. Why am I doing this? What is the point? Like, honestly, that could be your coaching practice right there. Why are you doing this? Like, you just follow your client around and every choice they're making to say, why are you doing this? That would probably be astonishingly effective. I don't know. But there are like a handful of go-to questions. And as a coach, you can try different questions and see what happens. Like, if I ask this kind of question, where do people go with it? So over time, you start to learn there's really only a handful of questions. Why are you doing this is a really good one. What are you doing is another really great one. There's just what is the benefit of not changing is a terrific one. So for motivational interviewing, there is that sort of 4-question matrix of like, what is good about not changing or the status quo? What would be bad about changing? What would be bad about not changing and what would be good about changing, right? But I've actually found the first 2 questions are quite enough. What is good about not changing and what would suck about changing? That produces remarkable shifts in clients. And I think it's not just about the questions you ask, but your ability to hold whatever comes after, right? So if we're not asking questions just to get through it. It's like we were talking about earlier, right? It's not just something to get through. You're asking questions to experience with the client this shift in their thinking. And that can only happen if you ask the question and give them time and space to reflect on it. So for example, a client might say to me, oh, here's what's good about all the dysfunctional things I'm doing. And I might just say like, well, let's just kind of let that float around and leave it for a few days, see what pops. Like, I don't feel any need to even respond to it necessarily. So I think the other half of the equation is asking good questions and then offering the space for the questions to do their job. Yeah.
So you've been studying this and practicing this for so long, and you have so many nuggets of wisdom and insights to share with them. Why a question versus an insight or a magical bullet?
Hey, don't get me wrong. Sometimes insights and magical bullets are awesome, right? Like we drop that, right? Like when a client is like receptive to the knowledge bomb and we drop it on them, amazing things can happen. So it's not that those tools are not useful, because all tools are useful in the right context. But there's something that happens in our brains when we invite inquiry, when we invite curiosity. Like there's a certain set of cognitive processes that occur when we treat reality as a little bit open-ended or invite people to speculate. Because when we start speculating, we do things like use imagination or we engage in evaluation. Like an insight might be, this is something that we know. Okay, maybe that's useful. Maybe that prompts something, right? Maybe that is like a link in the chain that connects to other links in the chain that does result in something really cool. But there's something about questions that ask us to do higher order conceptual tasks to, generate models of the world or disrupt them, to analyze, to synthesize. Why does this happen in this context and not in this context? Like that's the kind of stuff your brain just loves to chew on. And in solving that problem, or trying to think through that question, new truths emerge. So I think one of the challenges for our clients is, they're living out old behavior patterns that have expired. They're no longer useful, and they're less able to respond in the moment. It's like when you find someone with a movement pattern that they've been doing for 15 years, right? And they're then like unable to respond to actual physical conditions in the here and now. They respond in very patterned and rigid ways. It's very similar, right? So clients typically have trouble responding to fresh stimuli as if it were fresh. Questions kind of crack us out of that a little bit. Even a question like, what's happening now? What's happening now in your body? Like if you're cueing a movement, right? What's happening in your body right now? Where do you feel the weight? Where in your feet is the weight? Or, where's your head at? Or if I put my hand on your back, what are your shoulder blades doing, right? They invite us to engage with the here and now, which is the only time and place that we can really make any solid decisions.
Yeah.
Honestly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like I've never had this thought, but it seems like the difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? Like you could tell me something and I have the knowledge, or you could ask me a question. I could come up with the same answer myself. And now I'm a little bit wiser.
That's right. And wisdom is about pruning too, right? Wisdom is about only the essentials and no more. And wisdom has a certain kind of ownership. Like wisdom is mine in a way, right? Like when I generate the answer to it, that is now my answer rather than your answer.
Yes. One concept I heard recently was a good coach, when you are done working with him or her, you think, oh my God, he's so awesome. And a great coach, you get done working with him or her and you think, oh my God, she makes me feel so great about myself. Like I'm so awesome. That's been really present for me. And I think the reason it resonates with me so much is because I've taken the opposite approach for a lot of my coaching history, where my ego wanted validation so much. I wanted to give the insights and I wanted to create these aha moments for people so that indirectly, like I look like the hero. And what I'm learning is that it's my job to make them look like the hero. So my question for you is, how does that resonate with your belief of coaching? And how do you think self-awareness plays into that?
I think that's spot on. Absolutely. It's interesting because we get a lot of applicants at Precision Nutrition who want to tell us how awesome they are. And I'm always like, as a coach, your job is not to be awesome. I mean, you may be highly skilled and incredibly capable and smart, all those wonderful things, but your job is not to be awesome. Your job is to serve and help and guide and support other people, which is a completely different orientation, right? And so that's kind of like an any means necessary task as far as I'm concerned. And you're absolutely right. I buy into that completely. And I don't want to say a great coach should be invisible, because I think that's downplaying a little bit too much. But fundamentally, my role is, we've used this metaphor at Precision Nutrition. A coach is like a tour guide to a place that you already live. So it's like, when you have someone coming to visit and you're like, oh, what are we going to do? And you're like, oh, we could try that new restaurant. Or, gosh, I've never been down that street before. Or, you know what? When I lived back in Toronto, like I'd never been to the CN Tower. And, when I had people in town, I was like, gosh, I'm going to go up the CN Tower. And hey, it's pretty cool. So it lets you see familiar territory in an entirely new and empowering way. So, you may notice the coach doing that to you, or you may not. You may just emerge from the other end, not really sure how it happened. But either way, the coach's role is to serve and guide and support and show people the awesomeness that is either already inside them or just needs cultivation and development and nurturing to thrive. And self-awareness is a huge part of it, because I think you must be aware of how you were showing up, and how you yourself as the coach are playing out your own scripts within this dynamic with the client. And in counseling and therapy, they talk about transference, which is the client putting their stuff on you, but there's also counter-transference, which is you putting their stuff on them. So for example, like if you have a client that really annoys you, why? Maybe they're just empirically annoying people, right? Maybe they're just deeply annoying people, but maybe they activate something in you that is kind of an unclosed loop for you, or something that you struggle with, or maybe they make you feel stupid or something, right? So I think you always have to be engaging in a regular practice of, how am I showing up? Am I engaging in my patterns? Which is why, of course, coaches need coaches, right?
Yeah, and rather than looking like just blaming them for whatever, I don't know, uncomfortable emotions or uncomfortable thoughts you might be having, like first looking inside and seeing where you might be responsible. You might have some accountability.
Well, how you're participating in that dynamic. And whether you're letting it agitate you. Like clients are just going to client, right? Like that is what they do. And you're going to have a whole range of people that you work with, and they're just doing what clients do. And I think the more you can grasp that, the better. And, if you're feeling emotions like frustration or anxiety, or you're noticing thoughts like, well, why aren't they X, Y, Z, but in an angry way, that is a moment to check yourself. Like for me, frustration and resentment are like beautiful indicators that I've done something to create this dynamic. Whether it's because I'm wanting the change too badly from my client, or I'm trying to foist my values on them. Like, you should want this. How come you don't want this? There's lots of reasons, but there are certain emotions that for me are like perfect barometers of like, oh, you know what? This is my stuff.
One of my favorite, things that PN is a champion of is the concept of consistency being king. And I find that there are lots of culprits that keep people from being consistent, but especially with people that have been in health and fitness for a long time. I think one culprit can be this idea that at some point we're supposed to graduate and it's supposed to be really easy. So there's that. And then I heard you recently say something like, what we do as a white belt, or what we do as a black belt, is the same thing we do on day one as a white belt. How does this relate to nutrition?
Yeah. Great question. There's lots of ways I could answer that. So I think like you've made a really important point, that part of what shapes the disdain for consistency in North American culture is the idea that there is somewhere to go and something to achieve and some gold star that you can get or some way to graduate. And I think that's a fundamental belief that like incorrectly understands what we're actually doing here. Now, if you are in a performance sport, of course, there's a trophy to win or a gold medal to get. Like that's, yes, but in general, the behaviors that we do, there is no endpoint, but also the game conditions are constantly changing. Even within a single competition season, every day we are different as biological organisms. So the game is always changing. And then from a life cycle perspective, I mean, what was true for you at 20 will not be true for you at 30, will not be true for you at 40. And so like I work with a lot of clients who are like, oh, I used to be in such great shape, blah, blah, whenever. And I want to get back to that. Or, how come I can't do that now? And I'm like, because the landscape is completely different. You're a different person than you were 20 years ago. It's cool to know that you have the capability to do that at whatever point. But I think we cling to an idea that there is a single arbitrary standard that can always be maintained outside of context. That's not how biological systems work. We are constantly in flux. So, I mean, yes, you may make progress in the sense of like, you may get closer to an objective. You may get leaner, you may get stronger, you may get whatever, but there is no endpoint unless we want to consider death, like the time we stop playing the game. So I think that's just sort of a fundamentally problematic belief that I think impedes a lot of people. I mean, we've conceptualized fitness and nutrition as a short-term project rather than a set of practices that we do for life. But I also do believe that North American culture devalues basics. It devalues the consistent doing of simple tasks. Whereas, when you go around the world and you look at how other people teach things or practice things, I mean, it's no surprise that martial arts is a beautiful metaphor for this, because a lot of them came from cultures where practice was everything. And there was a very deep understanding and appreciation for practicing those fundamentals. So, I mean, partially it's a human thing too. Like we just want to be done with stuff sometimes, and that's totally fair. I want to get where we're going and step off the train. Right? Yeah. It's just a human thing as well. But
syndrome. We always want the new thing.
Yeah, totally. And that's just how human brains are wired in a lot of ways. And in 2020, we can access that, right? So, for most of human history, we didn't get that. but now we can. And I think that really hijacks and exploits our brain's natural tendency to look for the next best thing.
How do you feel in terms of your health and nutrition right now?
What a great question. I actually feel really awesome because I feel like myself, I have been in the last maybe 6 to 12 months, very focused on that consistent execution of essential behaviors. For me, that project has really come to the forefront, as well as the project of something that Michael Gervais calls commanding your mind. And in the last maybe year or 2 years, I've really thought much more deeply about what that means and tried to practice ways of commanding my mind. And again, not in a rigid, controlling way, but understanding that there's some level of agency that I have over how I show up mentally. And I mean, that kind of coincided with a major transition period in my life in which I had to start figuring out how to command my mind, because otherwise I was just going to lose it. So, it's not like I just sort of chose it one day. But what that has meant is I now feel better about my fitness and nutrition at 46 than I think I ever have in my life. Not because I'm putting at a peak physical performance, because I'm definitely not, but because the inner workings are now so solid. I have nothing to prove, no hoops to jump through. The origin of my behaviors comes from nowhere other than my values. And that is the most wonderful place to be, because, it fully empowers you to act on your own behalf, no matter what choice you make. And so it's not even like every single choice I make is absolutely terrific. It's more like every choice is considered. It's purposeful. I've gotten off autopilot. And that feels tremendous. And now there's it's interesting. Like I feel like I've now cultivated a very deep appreciation for how good it actually feels to just do this. Because I think a lot of people focus on, how am I going to look? Or I got to follow the rules. The workout is not the goal, right? The scale weight is not the goal. The body fat level is not the goal. It's a tool. The goal is to get somewhere else. It's to live in a body that is resilient and robust and, agile and, literally and figuratively, in which you can adapt to life's challenges. That is the goal. It's to do awesome things. So, and I think for me now, I've internalized that more than ever in my life. And so, yeah, I feel, honestly, I'm in the best shape in terms of deep health that I've ever been in.
Oh, that sounds like freedom, like freedom for sure. I'm curious. Something new is coming up for me that I'm noticing about myself, but for sure in so many people, is this desire to like be moving in a direction with my nutrition, right, towards something. And I feel like the moments or the periods of time where I feel like at such peace and I am completely free with my nutrition is when I'm really not working towards a goal. Like there might be some goal in the periphery, but it's more like I want to eat this way because it makes me like, it gives me the most energy and I'm not bloated. There's no like sensitivities going on and I just feel comfortable in my own skin. It's hard to break out of that desire to move in a direction. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, and I think we've been trained into that by the way that the fitness nutrition industry has evolved. And I think a lot of people who shaped the industry tended to be very goal-driven people. And so when we meet with a client, what's the first thing we ask? What are your goals, right? And the presumption is we should all have goals and be working towards goals. But in a sense of like being alive as a human being, that's ultimately a little bit of a meaningless construct. I mean, you may have particular objectives that you are working towards. Absolutely. Right. But I think that we have framed the whole project around goals to the exclusion of like, just being like showing up to the intrinsic process. And I guess like the analogy that I would use is there are certain goals that the harder you push for them, the worse you are at them. Falling in love is a great example of that. Or being funny. It's like when someone turns to you and they're like, okay, say something funny. It's like, now you've just guaranteed that I'm not going to be funny, right? And so there are certain kind of paradoxical goals. And I feel like nutrition and fitness to some degree falls into this, where the harder we chase them, the less we get them. So, and I think we have failed to acknowledge that as an industry, because we've assumed that everything can be put into that like SMART goal formula, or everything can be quantified, like it's the whole quantified self idea. But life resists this process. So we're always in this kind of like dialectic with it, right? So it is good to be objective oriented, especially for people that find it really helpful in like giving them energy in their life, right? Ultimately, I come back to like, what gives you energy or what takes away your energy, right? And I think a lot of people, this constant chasing of like, I got to get somewhere, it actually drains their battery. It takes the energy away. Whereas other people love like little mini projects, right? It does genuinely benefit them. But, most of our life is like circling the airport. You know what I mean? Like there's like just being present. It's like we talked about at the beginning of this call, like showing up to the moments of our life. And a lot of the time we aren't going anywhere exactly other than just existing. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's again, I'm thinking of the people who are listening to this who are like, oh, like they're more goal directed, and for them to live without a goal feels horrible. If that's you and you thrive with goals, knock yourself out. Set as many goals as you like. But it's like you said, you started noticing what the experience was for you when you tried things this way or that way. And maybe goal setting worked for you then, doesn't work for you now. It might work for you in future. It's it is a tool that you can pull out of the toolbox and use it when you want or when you need, and gather the data about how it is for you.
Yes. Yeah. I'm going through a lot right now. Like, I think that what goal setting in this area, in nutrition specifically, and fitness as well, for most of my life was very motivating, extremely motivating. And now I'm done competing. I'm done competing in the sports that I have competed in. I have a body that I feel really confident about. And so I keep going through this cycle of like kind of binge eating for a while, so that I can have a direction to get back to the where I'm confident. And it's like, it comes in different waves. And it's just not as motivating to me anymore, like the goal setting piece of it. So this has been really helpful for me.
Well, that's cool. See, we're having a breakthrough right now.
Yes.
But you said something super interesting there too, which is like, it used to work for me or used to feel valuable for me, and now it doesn't. And I think that's just such a fundamental human truth that a lot of us have a hard time with, because we're like, but this used to be a thing, right? And now it's not. And with kids, we understand that, right? You used to love this teddy bear and now you don't. But as adults, we tend to have this delusion that somehow we're just going to be all the same forever. And if there's one thing aging has taught me, it's that life has changed. And one day you might wake up and be like, you know what, screw goals. They're dead to me now. Like, and that's totally a thing that happens when you age. It's very random what the metaphor I think of is like, there's often times when you throw all the furniture out on the lawn and then are very choosy about what comes back in. So anyway, it's just a thing that happens. And I think we tend to imagine personality as very stable. Either you're goal directed or you're not, right? I'm this kind of person. I'm that kind of person. But these things are highly dynamic, and like literally every day can be a different relationship with this concept that we call goal. And what I love here that you've just done is like, you've called out your own cycle. Oh, I did this so that I could get that. And we don't even necessarily, like, it's not entirely clear what the function of have a goal is for you, but you've noticed a really interesting pattern that you're having around it.
This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much. What do you want people to know about?
In general, in life?
That you're up to, that they can go and do or read or watch or.
Okay, so the most timely now is the Coalition of Health and Fitness Leaders, doing some free webinars for folks who helping them transition into online coaching, especially because a lot of coaches are losing their livelihoods. So that's a big one. Obviously, tons of stuff with precision nutrition, so you can find me on their website. My book is still selling, which is fun. The Why Me Want Eat, which you can find on Amazon. That's still evergreen. It's still chugging along.
I love the subtitle.
Fixing your food fucked up attitude. I'm glad I can say that on this podcast.
Yes, you can.
So that's where to find me. Of course, you can find me on the social medias, the Facebooks and Instagram, and I'm around.
Awesome. Krista, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you.
Oh, thanks for having me. Great discussion.
This episode is also brought to you by Jambo CBD. If you're not already on the CBD train, then I'm sure you've at least heard of it before, because many people thought in the beginning that this was just a legal way to get high. And unfortunately for some of you, you can't get high on CBD. You can try, but you can't get high on it. On the other hand, it can help you sleep better. It can reduce stress and anxiety. It can be huge for pain relief and reducing inflammation. Personally, I've had knee pain for about 5 years now, and I haven't been able to figure out a way to get rid of it. I haven't figured out the root cause. I've worked with PTs and chiropractors, and I just haven't been able to eradicate it. So I have used some pain relieving techniques, and this is one of them. I've used Jambo's extra strength 200 milligram balm, and it absolutely does not completely take the pain away, but it makes it manageable. It allows me to get into a deeper squat. It allows me to walk around and just go about my daily activities without feeling much pain at all. And whether that's placebo or not, I really don't care, because I just don't feel like I'm in as much pain. I've also used their sprays, and there's a really subtle relaxing effect to the sprays. So that's pretty great. It's helpful for sleep and reduces a little bit of like a feeling of tension in my chest, which I often call anxiety. It's great for athletes and recovery. And some specifics and what sets Jambo apart is that they have 100% natural ingredients, full spectrum CBD sourced from Colorado and Oregon. They have CO2 extracted oils that are, I think, safer. They have therapeutic grade essential oils in a lot of their products, third-party lab tested, so it's legit. And they're one of the first CBD companies to post their lab results publicly. I also know the owners of this company very well. They're very close friends of mine, and I trust them deeply. Again, my favorite product of theirs is the 200 milligram extra strength balm. I've also used the sprays, but they also have drops and butters or ghee. I think ghee is like a butter type thing. So there's all sorts of different products. And they're offering you 15% off of anything in their store. And you can get access to that by going to jambocbd.com and use the code BRUTE in all caps. That's BRUTE in all caps. A couple more things. So a huge plus of their sprays and drops is that they use MCT oil. So since CBD is a fat soluble molecule, it binds with this oil and allows for much more rapid and effective absorption of the actual CBD. It also has essential oils that add flavor, and they bring their own proven health benefits as well. With the muscle balm, since they use ghee as the base, again, ghee is like a butter type thing, the CBD is binding with the ghee fat, and it's able to be carried all the way to the bones. Ghee itself has amazing topical healing properties, and when CBD is added, the results can be pretty profound. So again, you can get access to this discount, 15% off of all of their products, by going to jambocbd.com and enter the code BRUTE, all caps, at checkout. Go get them.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Your journey towards better fitness continues. Head over to brutestrengthtraining.com to connect with Michael and his guests. Access links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive to podcast listeners. That's brutestrengthtraining.com.